Animals. Resurrecting the lost giants of the Galapagos. They enthralled sailors. They inspired Darwin. Then, by the mid-19th century, the iconic Floriana tortoise was gone. Here's how a group of persistent scientists unlocked the secrets to bringing them back. The Galapagos Islands were named for the giant tortoises that have inhabited the archipelago for millions of years. Animals with mixed lineages like this one populate a remote corner of Isabella Island, which has emerged as a hotbed for genetic research. By Hannah Nordhaus. Photographs and video by Lucas Bustamante. August 13, 2025 inches October 1820, the Nantucket whaling ship Essex laid anchor at a blue-green harbor on the Galapagos island of Floriana, more than 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador. The sailors rowed their whaleboats ashore and followed paths trampled by ancient reptiles, through broken basalt and tangled thickets of saltbush and cactus, keeping a sharp lookout, wrote cabin boy Thomas Nickerson, for the object of their search. They were hunting for Galapagos giant tortoises. The animals varied from island to island, some had round, domed carapaces while others had shells that curved up at the front like Spanish riding saddles, but all could provide food for multiple sailors. When the whalers found a small turpin, they'd flip it over, tie canvas straps to each of the creature's legs, then hoist the tortoise onto their backs like a knapsack. They'd tie the largest ones, some weighing more than 500 pounds, by their legs to long poles, hauling them 2 or 3 men per side across sharp and uneven lava rock and back to their ship. Watch a tortoise rescue another in distress. Was it trying to help? There, they'd stack their captives upside down in the hold like nesting bowls. Tortoises could live up to a year without sustenance. They neither eat nor drink, nor is the least pains taken with them, wrote Owen Chase, the ship's first mate. They are strewed over the deck, thrown underfoot, or packed away in the hold, as it suits convenience. The Essex took more than 60 of Floriana's tortoises, which had the curved shells known as saddlebacks and were, Nickerson wrote, the most rich-flavored and delicious meat I have ever met with. Then the ship set off for the Pacific whaling grounds, where, a month later, it was rammed by a whale, a disaster that provided the inspiration for Herman Melville's Moby Dick. The sailors salvaged as many tortoises from the foundering ship as they could fit on their small whaleboats, eating them, and eventually, each other, on their ill-fated voyage back to the South American mainland. The other tortoises sank with the ship or floated away. A hybrid Floriana tortoise walks in the foothills of Wolf Volcano on Isabella Island. The Essex was far from alone in its plundering of Galapagos tortoises. Almost 2 centuries later, though, the Floriana tortoise is set to become the first extinct Galapagos species to be returned to its ancestral home. The revival of these gigantic creatures arrives at a moment when the resurrection of dire wolves is making headlines and scientists are working to retrieve the genes of other long-gone creatures like woolly mammoths. But such prehistoric species would return to a world that has lived without them for millennia. The descendants of the Floriana tortoises, by contrast, will be reintroduced to the place where they once belonged, playing a critical role in an ecosystem that still desperately needs them. To accomplish that, a team of dedicated scientists has not only pushed the frontiers of genetic sequencing to identify a species that had been hidden from plain view, but also traveled to remote corners of the archipelago and sorted through bones and shells from dusty archives to right one of the great wrongs of Galapagos history. This improbable scientific journey began in 2000. As a team of conservation scientists traipsed through the densely vegetated gullies at the base of the secluded Wolf Volcano on the northwest island of Isabella, they confirmed earlier observations that some of the tortoises there looked different. The animals had saddleback shells, a sign that they were a separate species from the more familiar domed ones on the volcano's higher, wetter slopes. There were pockets of tortoises that looked out of place, remembers conservation biologist James Gibbs, a National Geographic explorer and leader of the Galapagos Conservancy, which works to protect and restore the archipelago's wild ecosystems. How new initiatives are protecting the Galapagos for future generations. The large, sturdy feet of a Galapagos tortoise help to support its immense weight. When the Spanish arrived in 1535, hundreds of thousands of tortoises lived on the islands. In the following centuries, the animal's flesh became a staple for hungry sailors, threatening the species' survival. But for the past 50 years, read more. To learn more, Gibbs and the team took blood samples from every unusual-looking tortoise they encountered, placing identification tags on as many as they could, and sent the specimens to their research partner Adalgisa Gisela Cacone, an evolutionary biologist at Yale University and a National Geographic explorer. When she analyzed their DNA, she couldn't identify their genetic sequences. They didn't match those of any living tortoise species in her genetic database. Cacone was bewildered. "I called them aliens," she says. "We didn't know where they came from." The researchers considered the possibility that some of those aliens could have floated ashore from whaling ships like the Essex. Banks Bay, on the volcano's western flank, was the final Galapagos anchorage for many ships on their way to the whaling grounds, and sailors were known to sometimes throw their surplus overboard before. Some of those unwanted animals may have floated to shore and ascended the volcano's ragged flank, living among the native tortoises and eventually breeding with them. The whalers were responsible for the loss of so many tortoises, killing and eating most and carrying a number back home as trophies or pets. But perhaps, the scientists speculated, they had also inadvertently ensured the survival of the animal's genes. Only after several advances in genetic sequencing technology would the group realize the sailors had provided important clues to revive a species. After centuries of decline, hope on the islands. Human exploitation of the Galapagos giant tortoise led to a sharp decrease in all species, 3 of which became extinct. Decades of conservation efforts, such as captive breeding and control of invasive animals, reversed the population falloff. Period of conservation, after 1970. Tortoise species with saddleback shells occupy islands more accessible to sailors and were easily captured. Their numbers haven't bounced back as much as populations of dome-shelled tortoises. Scientists have been working to save the giant tortoises of the Galapagos since the middle of the 20th century, when only a few thousand were left on the entire archipelago. The whalers were gone, but tortoises had continued to fall prey to the creatures they brought with them: rats, pigs, dogs, and ants that fed on eggs and hatchlings, and goats and donkeys that disrupted and devoured their food supply. Galapagos National Park officials knew they had to do something or risk losing entire species. Beginning in the 1960s, conservation teams used the limited tools then available to save them. They started on Española Island, east of Floriana, where the population had been reduced to 14 individuals. Between 1964 and 1974, park officials moved all the tortoises from the island to the Charles Darwin Research Station at the park's headquarters on Santa Cruz Island. With the help of a strapping male brought in from the San Diego Zoo that, according to records, had come from Española in the 1930s, they bred thousands of young. After a laborious campaign to eradicate goats from the island, they then reintroduced the hatchlings, and today more than 3,000 tortoises live there. Park teams replicated that success on other islands as well. But despite those triumphs, there was one glaring disappointment: not finding a mate for the very last tortoise on Pinta Island, north of Floriana. Scientists had rescued the animal they named Lonesome George from his native island in the early 1970s, transporting him to a corral at the park's research station in hopes of preventing a 4th species from going extinct. In the years that followed, they anxiously searched for a partner. They first scoured Pinta with no luck. Then they placed females of other species with saddleback shells that resembled those of the Pinta in George's corral at the research center.